Please take your seats. The program is about to begin.
So much. Yes, ma'am.
Fantastic. Tech guy just did everything for us. Really neat. I have a feeling we're gonna be in a nice big empty room. It's all good. Are we being recorded? We are. Oh, good to know.
Oh,
Right. Yeah. We live for a little.
yeah. Actually, nothing terrifies me. I'm gonna get
Testing? Yeah, okay. Mike is live. Be great.
I'll be back in 15.
He's gonna get us some water. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here in this beautiful, large room. Just out of curiosity before we start, how many of you all are from universities? Anybody? How about community colleges, public two-year institutions? Commercial vendor type folk? Couple? Okay, state agencies or funders? We're a little bit of a mix. That's really cool. My name is Sherry Rannis. I'm with the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. And we're going to talk a little bit about what Texas has been doing on the short duration credentials of value front over the past 5 years. And that's, we're going to have that and then some really interesting casework, case study type material from my colleague, Ari Davis from the Lamar State College Orange about the project that Lamar has put together with this funding. So let's start off. In Texas, we are working under a strategy called Building a Talent Strong Texas. And it's a 2022 to 2030 strategy, has 3 pillars. Attainment of post-secondary credentials increasing, an increase in post-secondary credentials of value, and an increase in R&D and innovation. And this requires a collaboration across all sectors of post-secondary, but also workforce and K-12. So it's an employer. So it's an all-in kind of strategy and strategic view. The Texas Reskilling and Upskilling through Education, or TRUE program, really falls under that central pillar of post-secondary credentials of value. Just wanted to quickly give you our definition of reskilling and upskilling that you can read here. The provision of necessary education or training to support an individual's transition from his and her current role to a new occupation. That's what reskilling is about. Upskilling is that provision of education or training to enhance an individual's skills and knowledge with the goal of advancing to a higher skilled role in their occupation, in their current or similar occupation. The TRUE Grant program was created during the heart of the pandemic, basically. And the idea was that we were seeing folks who were being put on furlough or losing their jobs and might have had an opportunity or could perhaps have an opportunity to reskill and upskill. And we had community colleges, public two-year institutions who were willing to go in and actually build capacity to be able to respond to those adult needs. So the purpose was to create, redesign, or expand short duration, high value career and technical education programs. And chambers of commerce, economic development corporations, trade associations were also allowed to participate in a session, an annual grant program that provided dollars for institutions to do just that. And these were kind of open opportunities for capacity building. It included things like financial aid for students, student supports, equipment purchases, pretty much anything you can imagine to back up the creation of these short duration, 6 months or less duration credential programs. Also, the credential programs could be credit bearing or not credit bearing, which was also kind of a revolutionary thing, as we've always kind of segregated those two kinds of credential programs in Texas. Also very often, as we know, housed in different business units at colleges. But it was very intentionally open to both credit and non-credit, with an emphasis on stackability if that could possibly happen. Okay, so as I said, central goal, create, redesign, or expand these programs, make them short, and do them in partnership with industry. Those are sort of the three major principles of the True Grant program. And our state has invested heavily in this program since the pandemic. So as you can see, we're looking upwards of closing in on $100 million since 2021. The first 2 years of the grant program were federal dollars that were coming through the pandemic. And the past 2 years, actually 3 years now, has been state appropriated funds. So True is one of those programs started up during the pandemic that actually lasted, thrived, and was endorsed again by the state. And we were very excited to see that that was the kind of support we were getting for adult learners and returning adults to post-secondary settings. So here's some sort of spot data on what's been going on in 2023 through 25. This is state appropriated funds that were being used. About 233 programs have been redesigned or created or expanded in every part of Texas. And we have many regions, and it's a very big state, as we can always say with pride. About 77% of them were redesigns or expansions. About 23% of them, or 50 some odd, were new programs that were being built. And on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the fields that they broke down to. And again, not surprising, I think very clearly showing a responsiveness to need and market demand: healthcare and health tech, trades, CDL, commercial driver's licenses and heavy machinery moving, fabrication, particularly welding, logistics and transportation, business, IT and computing, public service, and a couple of other. But mostly healthcare and technology and trades and CDL and heavy machinery, reflecting a lot of the in-demand occupations at the time in the close of the pandemic running up until this year. So student outcomes. Since we have a lag in data, but the data we do have are for the first 2 years of True, which was 21, 22, and 22, 23. 11,500 enrollments of students from those 2 years of the program, and 65% of them completed their True Credential program, and 68% of them can be found in our employment data in Texas, which is a tricky thing to do because we don't have the world's greatest, most granular labor data. But to the extent that we can find them in our employment rolls in the state, it's about 68%. That 65% is interesting because we try to think of like, what is the benchmark though of completion for short duration programs? And to tell you the honest truth, we don't have a really good standardized benchmark in our state, that we're working on it, or federally. But there is some data, a little bit squishy. 43% of community college students who are enrolled complete their degree or certificate program in 6 years. That's sort of the 43% is kind of the standard. Again, it's not apples to apples here. It's the closest thing we'd get to a benchmark. But that 65% is nothing to sneeze at, I think, is the bottom line for that. In the outcome in the health sciences fields and health and health technology, about 4,800 enrollments, so about half of all the students, 68% completed, 73% are in the employment roles. And we also looked a little bit further on what's been happening in the last 2 years with the same offerings that were worked on in 21, 22, and 23. We have 68% completion rates through May 2024 in health sciences, 64% in transportation, distribution, and logistics, 56% in IT, 49% in manufacturing. So these numbers are good. They're promising, and they say a lot about the different kinds of things that True allowed institutions to do, including financial aid. And let's take a closer look at financial aid for a minute. Of the students who were supported during True Grant periods in 22 and 23, that was about 4,100 of them, and about $5 million of aid was provided. And their accomplishments were higher than their general student population. 75% of them earned their credential, 75% of them were found in our enrollment. We have a true cohort going on right now. They're finishing up in December and early winter this year. That was about almost $13 million in funding. We're working on 136 credential programs, which I always find just incredibly stunning. About 70% are designing existing programs to making them shorter and more effective. About 40 or so are planning and building new programs. And again, healthcare, health technology, trades, IT, fabrication, logistics are the top kinds of occupational areas that are being pursued. We introduced a new element to the TRUE program this past spring, which was an attempt to ask colleges, rather than actually to engage and start just do this fast startup of either redesign or creating new programs, spend some time planning and designing what you want to do. So we created something we call the TRUE Pathways Design and Planning Grant, TRUE PDP, which was for public two-year institutions to design a selected career pathway, CTE pathway, and the associated credentials of value in a high demand field, and to compress and accelerate that pathway. This is kind of the design it looks like. So it takes into account a huge flow of students through dual credit, going into programs called OSAs in Texas, Occupational Skill Awards, or ICLCs, which are credentials of licensure or certification. So they're often, I think that's another way of saying industry-based or industry-recognized credentials. Moving through level 1 certificates, level 2 certificates, which are a little bit more involved in particular kinds of skill sets, toward an applied associate degree. So this group of grantees has to think about program approval processes, student advising, faculty recruitment, equipment acquisition, facilities, data reporting, the registrar, and records and transcripts. They have a lot of different components to think about in this design and planning grant. We're running for the first time. This is the group of grantees we've got who are working on this in Texas right now as we speak. And you can see that they've picked very different kinds of high value occupational nodes to work on, to plan and design for accelerating and compressing and making it easier for students to navigate in and out of the workplace and in and out of credential programs. I think I'm excited about all of them, but I think in particular, our Texas State Technical College, we call affectionately TSTC, is a multi-campus operation across the state. It's grown rapidly in the past 5 years, and they have decided that they need to really build out their artificial intelligence capacity, and they're really building from scratch. Right now, they just have a kind of some sort of plug-in AI orientation type work, and they really want to build that from scratch, which is, I think, extremely exciting. But all of these are, because everything from nursing to advanced manufacturing to gas measurement instrumentation, all of these have their own challenges, both in terms of what employers want and new advances in techniques and equipment that are happening all the time. Planning and design is one of those things that probably should never stop from the perspective of an institution that wants to be responsive to the employee market. So that sort of gives you a sketch of what the TRUE program is about, and who's been involved in it and what they've been pursuing and what actually some of the outcomes have been, which we find to be impressive. Our state legislature gets another $25 to work on TRUE over the next 2 years. So we are pretty excited about what is to come and still to come with this program. But now we have the ability to highlight one of our grantees, Lamar State College Orange, who in a very prescient and strategic manner determined that they were going to work on maritime. They were going to work on shipbuilding. This is before the announcement last week that the federal government in Washington, D.C. is very interested in shipbuilding, but they planned this and thought about this about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago now, right? And so I'm going to hand this over to my colleague, R.E. Davis.
Well, good afternoon. My name is R.E. Davis, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Dean of Industry and Manufacturing Programs at the beautiful Lamar State College, Orange. I love the True Grant program. Absolutely love the True Grant program. I was just awarded my third True Grant, right, to help build up our industrial base in what's called the Golden Triangle. So you probably have never heard of Orange, Texas, and that's okay. We are down in the southeast corner of Texas, and so we are the last town before you drive into Louisiana in the southernest part of Texas, right? And so, we have historically had an industry-based and maritime-based economy. Our biggest products are essentially coming out of our chemicals industry and our petrochemical industry, but Orange, Texas is located on the Sabine River. And on the Sabine River, right, you can travel up and down the intercoastal waterway. You can go out to the Gulf of Mexico and do international shipping. Or, for example, we could go over to the mighty Mississippi here, get on a barge, take that barge all the way down, go over on the intercoastal waterway, and be on the steps. You see that red dot right there? We could dock a block, well, across the street from the campus and never have to set foot on land except to fuel up on our tugboat. Now, it would take a lot longer than flying to push a barge down that way. But one of the interesting things about Orange, Texas is that in World War II, almost overnight, the small town of about 7,000 residents became a city of 60,000 residents because of the shipbuilding industry that the United States government promoted in that area. In fact, about 1940, 1941, Orange was marked out for shipbuilding because someone in planning and direction saw that, you know, there would be a need for America to have a large amount of ships, particularly destroyers and cargo vessels. And so they started building out the shipbuilding industry. People were living in chicken coops, but I don't know how much you know about the economics of Texas, but deep East Texas, right above us, is very, very rural and very, very poor. And by putting the shipbuilding industry right there in Orange, it had been there in World War I as well, this allowed people in the Great Depression to migrate south, live in Orange, and have access to the skills, trades, and crafts, which allowed them to create a livable wage. And a lot of folks ended up saving up a great deal of money. A lot of folks ended up getting drafted, and their wives and sisters and aunts all went to work in those industry. We were the hub of the Riveters. So the Texas maritime industry, everybody thinks of Texas as like cowboys and horses and cowboy hats, and of course oil drilling and stuff like that. But the Texas maritime industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So the economic contribution to the economy is about $14.3 billion, right? We have one of the largest and busiest ports, the Port of Houston, right there. I don't know if y'all know, but Houston is the fourth largest city in the United States and also an economic hub of innovation. Texas ranks third nationally for domestic maritime jobs. So there's about 56,000 direct jobs and $4 billion in annual worker income. And so what we wanted to do was figure out a way to create jobs across the southeastern corner of Texas, right, and plug into that maritime industry. Texas has the longest coastline, right, of all the contiguous states in the United States, and drives, you know, our manufacturing in both oil and gas drive in our area of Texas, that corner right here next to Louisiana, where it says Port of Sabine Pass. It drives, it's mainly driven by petrochemical industries. In fact, we've had huge increases in LNG shipments. So as LNG has become, liquid natural gas has become more expensive, and because of things like Russia's war on Ukraine, et cetera, more LNG is being shipped out of the United States to our foreign allies. So what we did for our True Grant was we partnered with our sister school, Lamar State College Board Author. We worked with Workforce Solutions of Southeast Texas, our local workforce board. We worked with Angelina College, which is just north of us, and of course the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, in order to work on a program expansion for our maritime program. Now, we had an okay maritime program, it was doing pretty good, but one of the weird things about our maritime programs, we didn't actually have a boat. Right? Like we had an on-land maritime program, but we did not have any sort of ship. So Texas, the citizens of the state of Texas were kind enough to give us about $500,000, $500,000. And we started figuring out how can we connect inland students to maritime jobs. So across East Texas, let's take Newton County, for example. Newton County is a very rural county, very agricultural county. There's not a big industrial base there. So if you were living in Beaumont or Port Arthur, yeah, you could get a job in the plants, become a maintenance technician, become a process operator, no problem. But in Newton County, in order to do that, you would have to drive about an hour and a half every day for your 610s, right? And then go back home. But if you had a maritime job, you could go out to sea for a week, 2 weeks, come back, spend 3 weeks at home, right? Good paying jobs, strong economic opportunities, and that would allow for employment flexibility, industrial growth. Maritime is a very fast on-ramp. We've spent a long time developing our partnerships with the maritime industry. So you saw the map earlier where it said, Cert 1, Cert 2. We have industry coming to our program and hiring people before they complete Cert 1, right? So essentially they enroll in the program, they start learning their maritime skills, industry is coming in and hiring them. And it's hard to make them stay. Right? If you go and look at our AES completion numbers in maritime, they're really not that good, but they're not good in a very good way because the maritime industry is coming over, recruiting our students, and they're taking those students from being a maritime student, learning their basic maritime skills, getting their MMC or merchant marine credential, and they're going to work in a $65,000 to $70,000 a year job, right? My first job paid $24,000. Right. And so to step into a $70,000 a year job for a student is life-sustaining wages. There's two things that I firmly believe about two-year colleges and community colleges. One, we are the economic engines of our local economy. And two, you cannot graduate students into poverty, right? You've got to have programs that create life-sustaining wages for those students. And our maritime program allows for those life-sustaining wages. It's a fast on-ramp. There's very few barriers to entry, and it connects those students to a nationwide industry. So if I'm a 21-year-old and I go and I get my MMC, yeah, I can get a job down at the docks in Port Arthur and I can be working the next day. But you know what? I'm going to meet people up and down the Mississippi River. I'm going to meet people that are working out of Boston. I have the opportunity to move, so I've got that mobility. And then if I do well in that, I can go to our four-year partners like Texas A&M Galveston, get my blue water certificates, and then I can be sailing all across the world and work my way up to a captaincy where I'm sailing across the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and I'm pulling in about $600,000 a year, right? All from being a poor kid in deep East Texas. And so our goal is to get those students that credential of value as quickly as possible. And one of the ways that we did that was we needed a boat. And we were able to leverage the True Grant in order to build what we call the training vessel Margie. It's named after the mother of our last president, who actually came down from Deep East Texas and worked in the shipyards in Orange, right? And so this was a team effort. This was a team effort between instructional staff saying, hey, this is what we need as far as the boat is, administrative staff filling out contracts, visiting the factory, financial staff trying to keep us in line so that we didn't spend too much money, and facilities staff, because believe it or not, you have to have insurance on a boat, you have to be able to store a boat, you have to be able to haul a boat. What do you do with a boat in a hurricane? All these projects had to be solved. But the training vessel Margie was built. It allows for both land and sea training. And you saw in an earlier slide that sea time was an important thing. The boat allows our students to essentially stand watch and gather that sea time. And after they have enough sea time, they have a TWIC card, we can go and have them, they have to do a drug test. Then we have them go and get their merchant marine credential. And once they have their MMC, they are ready for employment. Now we can move them forward into other USCG, U.S. Coast Guard maritime certificates, but honestly, there is such a high need for maritime that our students are getting hired before they even complete those. So the training vessel goes out, our students work on it, they do all the maintenance and operations on it, and it's allowed for our maritime program to grow. So sometimes success breeds success, and so we've expanded into dual credit opportunities at one of our local high school. We're targeting adult learners, particularly with our workforce and continuing education programs. And through Perkins, we're working on our special populations and veterans. So for example, somebody rotates out of the Navy, then we can look at what is available to them and move them closer to completing that AAS in maritime and logistics. But our number one goal is that Texas reskilling and upskilling through education. So the True Grant created this opportunity. It would not have been possible without this grant, and it's had a major impact on the lives of students. And we are truly blessed to have a state that looked at our program, said, hey, you guys have a need, made it an extremely easy process. I mean, I fill out a lot of grants. Some of them are extremely easy. Some of them are extreme. Have y'all done an NSF grant? Right. Sometimes there's a lot of stuff to fill out, but like the True Grant is extremely easy to do. It's easy to really show them the logic of what you want to do, and I absolutely positively love working with our colleagues at the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, because it's helping our students to become employment ready. And that is our entire mission at Lamar State College Orange. My division is about the skills, trades, and crafts, and getting those students to work as quickly as possible to drive that Texas economy. And so we're meeting industry standards. That took a lot of work with our industry partners. We've expanded our capability. We've created employment pathways. In fact, almost too good, because we can't retain students, because as soon as they gain some skills, we're basically just doing basic training and then they're getting snatched out of our programs, which is great for our students. Not so great to have to explain to my leadership why my, credit hour numbers aren't as good as like my other programs. But it's because those students are going out and getting jobs, and that's what it's about. It's about acting as that economic mobility accelerator. And so we've got those employment pathways. And honestly, if you have a boat, it's a pretty great marketing tool, right? We've got it branded. We take it in parades. If you ever come visit the college, even if you never see me, I can almost guarantee you the president's going to take you by this boat and you're going to look at it, because it's not small. We have an accompanying barge that we push around with this boat. It is an industrial boat meant to train them in industry. It's not as big as a tugboat itself, but it's pretty darn close, and we're very, very proud to have it. Oh, you bet.
Yeah. So, whoops. Right. Okay. So we're about to announce our latest cohort of true grantees in about 2 weeks. Again, very focused on student outcomes and high value credential areas. We're getting more data about where those student outcomes are about, especially in the employment section. Our legislature passed some significant legislation in this past year, that is going to improve the granularity of that labor market data that I was talking about. Rather than having students classified in these sort of very large sort of areas, it'll get a lot more specific about what occupation, what kind of jobs they have. And so that'll be able to track back to what the intentions of our grantees have been in terms of where students are working. And we also have legislature pass a very important piece of legislation, SB 1786, which requires our three main state agencies, the Texas Workforce Commission, the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, and the Texas Education Agency, or K-12 agency, to work together to better align our workforce grant programs. That's a big challenge for three state agencies of our size and complexity to do, but we're very committed to it. And then we think that the programs like True, which are somewhat fungible and pretty open, might be very conducive to something combined with different programs offered by our Texas Workforce Commission and Texas Education Agency. So that's all up ahead. That's the work for the next year or so. So we're a small group, and I hope you don't get too formal here, but if anyone has any questions, be happy to answer them. And then we have a couple of questions for you. Yes.
What happened to the others? Or do you not have employment data? Are they perhaps in school?
It's a really great question. Thank you. So the residual, those are not tracked down. There are a couple of different things. Our data doesn't include students who leave the state or employed out of state. So that's probably a significant portion. We do believe that there is a portion that are re-enrolled, perhaps in a different kinds of program. And then there are those who are either not in school or not employed, and they would also be counted in that group. But we think that significant amount of that number is probably folks employed out of state. We don't have unified data sets with our neighboring states, for example. It's a great question. Thank you. Okay, we're going to ask you some questions then. Our first question is if reskilling and upskilling students are the way you talk about adult learners and returning adults at your institution or with your workforce board. Does anyone does anyone do that actively on your campus? Do you think about it that way in that terminology? We have a lot of different ways of talking about returning adults. This is just yet another one, but anybody? An example? No? No? Way over there. Yeah. Right. Is your pathway, micro-credential pathway at your institution, or is there state policy and guidance for it as well in New York? You do. Oh, thank you.
CUNY is the other public system in New York State that are also developing a micro-credential policy. So, and we have state support, so it sort of quasi-functions as a state policy.
That's really interesting. That's right. We do not have an explicit micro-credential policy in Texas, or not something that is called out that way. And I think that's a little bit of the residual from being born out of the pandemic, where there was a need and a program was stood up, and that program got legislative attention, but it did not stem from a policy or an approach to micro-credentials. In fact, hopefully will precede it. Perhaps we will be able to engage in that kind of conversation that you have a State University of New York system, because that's an impressive thing to do. Some states already have explicit policies. I believe Idaho does, and there are a couple of others. You're nodding. Do you think of that?
Get the beauty flavor of Cynthia's theory. I work for a tech company, but we're partnering with one of the beauty institutions, trying to figure it out as they go. So it's not, they're about to launch their first program, and hopefully we'll be able to help them figure out what that looks like, but it's coming up organically because they were able to find funds from several charitable organizations to start a few pilot programs.
I wonder if people are scared off by the term micro-credential just in general, because in fact, there are lots of different definitions assigned to it. Someone over there, you're nodding. You think so too?
As opposed to what an institution delivers. And so while micro-credentials can be helpful, I think you would avoid some of the kind of bad branding around that if you centered on what's at the end of the day is the learner going to get.
Right. And also reskilling and upskilling allows for, it's a big tent, right? It allows for sponsored programs within, which are a very large part of what we do in community and technical colleges, where the employer comes directly to the institution, right? Not as much, I guess, at the university level, unless it's a research enterprise, but certainly in two-year publics, employer can conceivably come to an institution and say, start up a program for us, you know, which is, happens all the time. Yeah. As we were thinking about questions to ask you, and we were wondering if the Lamar State College Orange, I lovingly call you guys LISCO. I don't know if that's the right thing to do or not. Their decision to go build up and work on maritime, rebuilding maritime, I guess historically speaking, in their region, in the southeast part of Texas. As he was talking about the way they thought about it and the history behind it, and now they're actually, as I said, feeding into a larger national theme around resurrecting shipbuilding. Did something come to mind for your own region or your own institution that might benefit from a capacity building support of this kind? Which, by the way, we can talk a little bit more about how it does and doesn't overlap with other kinds of funding sources like Perkins. Yeah.
I didn't have my hand up, but I'm
Oh, sorry.
when you think about underserved industries, are you talking about I'm thinking about our welding program. You know, we just don't have enough capacity, and many of our students leave before they get a credential or a degree
Right.
because they get jobs.
Right.
So you know, we really are looking at credentialing there.
So, like I said earlier, you know, I know my academic overlords will disagree, right? But man, if they're leaving for a job before they finish their credential, that's a win. That's totally a win for that student, right? The whole goal of the education isn't necessarily the credential. It's a pathway to a better life, right? Now, if we, as we saw in our earlier session, if we can then like bring them back for reskilling or upskilling in like 5 years or something like that, right? But I mean, if they're, you know, if they're doing their Cert 1 in 1 semester and getting hired and stepping to a $70,000 job, that's good for my economy, right? That's good for my community. And so, like, even though they're not finishing that AAS, and my AAS numbers look bad, I can go back and look at that data and be like, look, we started with these 15 students and 13 of them left to go get jobs, right? You know, and the employers are happy, then we are serving the taxpayers well, and we're serving the future. I do a lot of program planning. I love program planning. I love thinking about programs strategically. We had a great conversation at lunch about this, and I go down a lot of rabbit holes about what is going to be next, right? So there's 2 ways to think about program planning. What industry need is right now, right? So, you know, I don't know, they're building a bunch of buildings, and so like there's a huge need for construction managers, okay? Or what industry is going to be there in 5, 10, 15 years, right? And that's the much harder one. We're working on robotics and automation right now. Robotics and automation is going to lead to AI because AI is going to allow for things to do like bin picking. I bored Doc here over lunch talking about rare earth minerals, which led me to explore things like magnet manufacturing, right? Which led me to explore things like, okay, do we have enough water infrastructure? Do we have enough electrical infrastructure, right? Well, how do we do plant operations for electricity? And so honestly, as an administrator or as a planner, you've got to the number one thing you've got to do is give yourself that space to really dig into that labor market data and spend time thinking about what industry is going to come up, right? I have a 20-page paper about shipbuilding because, like, you know, I heard something about shipbuilding. I was like, oh yeah, we can only build like 5 ships a year. Well, that's not good. If we get into a war, that's going to be real bad. And so like we started looking at like shipbuilding and how shipbuilding works, and you just have to give yourself that space for exploration. I go down a lot of blind alleys where, you know, I learn about something like, man, this isn't, I looked at mining, right? We are not in a mining area. I think mining is going to become more important in Texas, right? But I don't think it's in the region that I'm serving, right? And so I just kind of set that aside, but that led to like magnet manufacturing, because what do you do with all the rare earth minerals that you mine? Well, it's more than just batteries. So you got to give yourself that space to really dig in. And honestly, it's a silly term, but you have to be able to future cast about the economy. And not every win is gonna be there, but you've got to be able to imagine what it's going to look like in 5 or 10 years.
You heard it here first, people. Batteries and magnets. This is what we were talking about at lunch. And we're not kidding. I think this is brilliant.
If you want to have a good time, read about magnet manufacturing.
But I mean, that's the kind of thing. I mean, yes, you were mentioning like underserved industries. In Texas, we have a chronic shortage of truck drivers, and they are vital to every element of our economy, regionally and statewide, nationally for that matter. It was not a surprise that there were many schools that applied for commercial driver's license CDL funding in the first 3 years of this program. It was reflecting a direct need, a direct underserved sort of pipeline into an industry that was basically in great stress, under great stress and crisis. Same thing with construction, which, as we all know, boomed during the pandemic. And just the sort of that pipeline wasn't strong enough, wasn't big enough, and our schools immediately glommed onto that. I think public, community, and technical colleges are really very agile when it comes to the immediate. What's harder is the forecasting, and you don't always get it right. Yeah.
So, thank you, Rod. I have a question about thinking about the extended career pathway for these students. Have you thought about, or are you providing opportunities for them to be awarded credit for this training so that should they want to come back, to get the next stage, and, how is that working?
So we had a big emphasis on keeping this open to whatever capacity the institution thought they needed, whether it was on the continuing education side of the house or on the credit side of the house. But we also emphasized that we wanted to see thoughtfulness around stackability and credit conversion. Again, we don't have explicit policies yet in Texas on these things. We don't have explicit guidelines. So our institutions refer back to their accreditor guidelines and look at some of the contours of the different kinds of programs that we have that are at the certificate level or below. Sub-certificate 1 is what we call them, sub-certificate. And so we encouraged it. We didn't mandate it. Most of our true grantees, though, kept it high in mind because, again, it reminds me of a conversation I had about 5 years ago with somebody at another college in the Gulf Coast area of Texas. And she said, once there are students, they're ours for life. And it's exactly the same sort of attitude that Ari was just mentioning and other sessions have talked about. Once you have someone in a micro-credential or short-term, short duration program, and they succeeded and they got the job that they wanted, they felt like they got reskilled or upskilled, which was what they were looking for, they will come back to you again. They will come back to you again. So this wonderful provost at this college in the Gulf Coast said that was the way she presumed this work would run. And they were persistent and consistent about reminding students who had gone through these shorter programs that they were part of that college. And it's another element of sort of outreach and consistent outreach, right? That I think that sometimes our colleges are a little bit too overwhelmed by everything else to think about, but in fact plays a very important role in the way we serve our communities.
So on the local level, I always hear the term curricular design, right? My preferred term is curricular architecture, right? And so let's say a student does their Cert 1, goes off, gets a job in maritime, okay? Well, I also have a CDL program, right? So student comes in 1 semester, gets their CDL. That's in workforce and continuing education. So that's non-credit program. They go off and start driving a truck. 5 years later, 6 years later, okay, well, I'm kind of tired of driving a truck. I'm tired of being an able seaman. I want to move up to this leadership position. But man, there's a degree. Man, I got you, right? So you're going to come back to the college, right? In fact, I've got a coordinator. Their job is to do nothing but contact those people who are some college, no completion, right? You know, they also like check on them, say, do you need any like help getting a job? They're running interview workshops all the time, stuff like that. Cause I mean, ain't no point in them being in a program if they ain't gonna get a job, right? And so truck driver comes back, well, these are C's, no problem. I can automatically convert them to credit, right? Now, you're still driving a truck. It's not magic. You got this credit, right? You want to do an AAS. Well, guess what? My logistics AAS is all online, right? So if you finish the maritime, like let's say you only do Cert 1 in maritime, you get a job and leave. Well, now you're an able seaman, right? You've got your sea time, stuff like that. You come back, I'll convert your able seaman into my Cert 2, right? Not a problem. You can join my online logistics because now, you know, you're not 20 years old, you're not 19 years old anymore, right? You're an adult learner, you got a family, you bought a house out in Newton County, you got a bass boat and a dog and 3 kids, right? And so sounds like you've been in Newton County. So you know, the bass boat and the truck, if you want to sell your programs in Texas, you show them how it's going to allow them to buy a big old truck and a bass boat. That's all you got to do, right? So you know, like that's, I mean, we can put numbers up all day long, but to a 19-year-old kid, like 70,000 doesn't mean nothing, right? You'll be able to buy a bass boat and a truck in 2 years or less. They're like, sign me up for this program. I want to take it. So anyways, they come back as an adult learner, but now our curriculum architecture is there so that they can complete that while working full time. And so when we were making this whole design, we had to think through, you had to like Imagineer, to steal an idea from Disney, right? You had to Imagineer like the full life cycle of the degree or certificate, right? And it kind of worked, right? But guess what? Turns out that a lot of my adult students, right, didn't, you know, look, I'm an able seaman, right? I work on a tugboat. I'm not so great on the computer. Well, originally we designed an online program, right? So in fall, I'm trying to add in person at night logistics classes because that's what the research told us, right? So we're going to keep the online program. That's going to still keep going, but we think we'll have better results with those in-person at night classes for those adult learners, right? But what happens if, you know, our student is out for, you know, 2 weeks, right? But, you know, on ship, and well, guess what? You can do part of your program online. We'll set it up as a hybrid, right? Oh, you're on duty? Yeah, do your stuff online. We're going to build it to where you can do it on your phone because you're not sitting there with a big old computer on board the ship, right? On the tugboat. But when you come back, you're more comfortable in class. Yeah, walk on in. You know, there may be 3 people in a class that never see each other because they're going on and off duty, you know, all the time. But we've got to build it with that flexibility in order to meet their needs, right? So that's what we're trying to do. But we had to think about that like before it ever happened, and that's that curricular architecture portion of it.
The follow up and follow through has got to be, again, thoughtfully planned, strategic, and persistent and consistent. And that's not easy. It also has to be customized to the program, as you were detailing. Yeah. But it's so worthwhile. It's so worthwhile because they will become, you don't want to use the word customers, but your students for life.
And what this doesn't show is there's another form past the associate's degree in the state of Texas called the Advanced Technical Certificate. So let's say I'm on board a tugboat and I'm an able seaman, right? And I do finish my AAS in maritime, but I want to go into maritime engineering, right? And so that's not designing boats necessarily, but it's a motor maintenance for the boat. There's basically 2 advanced paths in maritime. One is captaincy, the other is engineering. And so I also have an electromechanical program. Now we don't have it, but what we're discussing is building an advanced technical certificate, which is 15 to 50 hours,
Okay.
right? And so once I've got, you know, once I have my AAS, I don't qualify for financial aid anymore. But if I'm working on an advanced technical certificate that is justified through industry need, then I qualify for financial aid. And so we could set up an ATC for electromechanical, basically boat engineering, right? To teach them like motor repair, stuff like that. And it would allow a student who already had their AS, they don't need a bachelor's, they're not going to go into maritime engineering or, something like that, but it would allow them to upskill on the credit side. Or if we did that engineering portion on the continuing education side, we could, write those into usable credits under an ATC, and it allows access to that financial aid in order to like upskill my career. Essentially, it leads me down a different career path if I get tired of like throwing ropes on a tugboat.
We have about another 1 minute or so. Anybody else have any thoughts or question for us?
Not at all. I was just going to respond to the question about what's needed locally. I live in New York City, and one of the programs that seems to be gaining prominence is behavioral health, which has sort of several layers to how it benefits the community. So one, it can be a great job, but the pathways aren't clear. So part of the work is figuring out what is a behavioral health specialist? What should be the career advancement? So there's work being done by hospitals and through grant funding to figure that out so that there's actually a reason for people to go into it. But two, when you succeed with your clients, with your patients, then you've just helped your community as well by helping somebody live a better life, improve the quality of your neighborhood and everything else. So I just wanted to share that when you asked. About
Really brilliant. That's wonderful to hear. I mean, that again, it's that sort of sweet spot, right? Where there's a need, but there's an articulation issue, a definitional issue, a forecasting kind of exercise. It's lots of work to do, but very, very cool. Very interesting. Anybody else? Well, we want to thank you for your time and attention, and come visit us down in Texas. It's a lot warmer than here, but anyway, we appreciate you and your attention. Thanks.